Chosen one, there is a kind of exhaustion that sleep does not fix. You can rest through the night, wake up with a clear schedule, and still feel strangely heavy after interacting with certain people. At first, you may assume it is just stress, responsibility, or the normal pressure of life. You tell yourself everyone feels tired sometimes. But if you pay attention closely, you may notice a pattern that becomes harder to ignore. The fatigue does not appear randomly. It shows up after specific conversations, specific phone calls, or specific encounters with certain individuals. One moment you feel stable, focused, and emotionally grounded, and the next moment, your energy feels scattered, your mind foggy, and your spirit unusually drained. Chosen one, not every form of exhaustion comes from the workload of life. Sometimes the drain comes from the people around you. There are individuals who unconsciously or intentionally pull emotional energy from others in ways that leave them depleted.
In everyday language, this dynamic is often described as an energy vampire. But the concept itself is not mystical or exaggerated. It simply refers to someone who consistently takes emotional attention, reassurance, time, or access without returning balance to the relationship. They lean on your empathy, your patience, and your willingness to listen until your inner reserves slowly begin to wear down. The result is not always obvious in the beginning. You may leave the conversation feeling confused rather than clearly upset. You might feel responsible for helping them, even when the situation is not yours to carry. Sometimes you feel guilty for wanting space, even though your spirit quietly asks for distance. This pattern can be difficult to recognize because many chosen ones are naturally compassionate people. God often places empathy in their hearts so they can encourage others and offer support when it is truly needed. But empathy without discernment can slowly become a burden. When you care deeply about people, it becomes easy to overlook the difference between healthy support and emotional dependency. You may convince yourself that someone just needs help, that they are going through a difficult season, or that being patient with them is simply the right thing to do. And sometimes that is true. There are moments when people genuinely need kindness, understanding, and a listening ear. But there is an important distinction that wisdom eventually reveals. Healthy support flows in both directions. Even when one person is struggling, the relationship still contains mutual respect and awareness. Emotional draining relationships, however, function differently. One person consistently takes, or the other consistently carries. Over time, the imbalance becomes visible not through dramatic events, but through quiet depletion. Your emotional reserves feel lower. Your motivation becomes harder to maintain. Conversations that once felt manageable begin feeling like obligations you dread. Yet many chosen ones continue giving because they believe love requires unlimited availability. This belief can keep them trapped in draining dynamics much longer than necessary. But chosen one, God never called you to become everyone's supply. Compassion does not require the abandonment of wisdom. Loving people does not mean sacrificing the health of your spirit. In fact, discernment is one of the ways God protects the calling placed on your life. If your energy is constantly drained by situations that never change, your ability to pursue purpose becomes weaker. The peace God wants to cultivate within you becomes harder to maintain. This is why learning to recognize emotional draining patterns is not selfish. It is stewardship. Just as a gardener protects the soil that produces healthy growth, you must protect the emotional and spiritual energy that allows your life to move forward with clarity. At the same time, recognizing these patterns does not mean demonizing people. Many individuals who drain others are not acting out of cruelty. Some are deeply wounded, lonely, or accustomed to relying on others because they never learned healthier ways to process their struggles. Their pain is real. Their need for support may even be sincere. But sincerity does not erase the impact their behavior has on your life. Compassion must be balanced with boundaries.
You can acknowledge someone's pain without becoming the container that holds all of it. You can care about people without allowing their emotional storms to define the climate of your own spirit. This is one of the quiet lessons God teaches chosen ones as they grow. Not every relationship is meant to receive unlimited access to your time, attention, and emotional energy. Some people are meant to walk beside you in balanced partnership. Others are meant to be helped briefly and then encouraged to seek the support they truly need.
And a few may require distance altogether if the pattern of draining never changes. In the next part of this journey, it becomes important to recognize the signals your own body and mind are already giving you. Because long before your logic fully understands what is happening, your nervous system often recognizes the pattern first. Chosen one, before your mind fully understands that something is wrong in a relationship, your body often recognizes the imbalance first. The human nervous system is designed to detect patterns of safety and stress long before conscious thought organizes those signals into words. That is why many people feel something shift inside them after interacting with certain individuals, even when they cannot immediately explain what happened. The experience rarely begins as a clear realization that someone is draining your energy. Instead, it appears through small physical and emotional signals that seem unrelated at first.
You might begin a conversation feeling stable, even optimistic about your day, only to notice that by the end of the interaction, your focus has disappeared. Your thoughts feel slower, your mood feels heavier, and your motivation quietly fades. This sudden drop in energy is often the first indicator that your system is responding to something deeper than ordinary conversation. Many chosen ones describe this moment as a post-interaction crash. Before the call or meeting, their mind feels clear and their energy feels available. Afterward, however, a strange exhaustion appears. The body feels tired, even though nothing physically demanding occurred. Irritation may surface without a clear reason. Sometimes, a subtle fog settles over the mind, making even simple tasks feel harder than they did an hour earlier. Because this pattern develops gradually, people often dismiss it as coincidence. They assume the fatigue came from work, stress, or a long day. But when the same feeling repeats consistently after contact with the same person, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. Your body is quietly recording the emotional cost of the interaction. Another signal often appears even before the interaction begins. Anxiety forms at the moment contact becomes possible. You may notice it when a certain name appears on your phone or when you see a message notification from someone you know tends to bring emotional weight with them. Your stomach tightens slightly. Your breathing becomes shallow. Instead of answering immediately, you delay the response, even though you normally reply quickly to others. The hesitation is not laziness or indifference. It is your nervous system anticipating the emotional load that usually follows the conversation. Your mind remembers what your heart has tried to excuse. The body prepares for the familiar pattern before the conversation even begins. Over time, this anticipation can become strong enough that simply seeing the person's name triggers a sense of pressure. Even if nothing negative has happened yet, your body already knows how the interaction typically unfolds. After the conversation ends, another subtle effect may appear that many people struggle to identify at first. Instead of returning to your normal rhythm, your mind continues replaying the interaction long after it is over. You think about what was said, what you should have said, or how you could have responded differently. You analyze small details of the conversation, searching for ways to reduce the tension you felt during it. This lingering mental replay creates what can be called an emotional hangover. The conversation may have lasted only 15 minutes, but its impact follows you through the rest of the day. You may feel guilty for wanting distance, even though nothing in the interaction actually required you to carry responsibility. Your thoughts circle around the situation repeatedly, draining energy that could have been used for more meaningful parts of your life. This emotional residue often becomes one of the clearest indicators that something unhealthy is happening in the dynamic. Healthy conversations tend to leave clarity behind. Draining interactions leave confusion. Alongside this emotional replay, you may notice that your ability to focus weakens after engaging with certain individuals. Tasks that normally feel simple become strangely difficult. Your motivation drops, even though your schedule has not changed. The mental clarity you had earlier in the day becomes scattered, as if part of your attention is still stuck in the conversation you just had. This loss of focus is not accidental. Emotional energy and cognitive clarity are closely connected. When a conversation pulls heavily on your emotional resources, the mind often struggles to return to productive thinking immediately afterward. Your energy has been redirected toward managing the emotional weight of the interaction, rather than supporting the goals you were pursuing earlier. Over time, these patterns accumulate into a quiet form of exhaustion that many chosen ones mistakenly blame on themselves. They assume they need better discipline or stronger emotional resilience. But the deeper truth is often much simpler. Your nervous system recognizes what your heart keeps excusing. Your body is responding honestly to dynamics that your compassion may be trying to overlook. This is why paying attention to these signals is so important. They are not random moods or personality flaws. They are information. They reveal the emotional cost certain relationships are placing on your life. When you begin observing these patterns with clarity, you move one step closer to understanding how energy-draining relationships actually operate. Because the exhaustion you feel is rarely created by a single conversation. It develops through repeated behaviors that follow a recognizable pattern over time. And once those behaviors become visible, it becomes much easier to see exactly how the draining dynamic continues to repeat itself. Chosen one. Once you begin recognizing the signals in your body and mind, the next step is learning to observe the behaviors that create those signals in the first place. Energy-draining relationships rarely depend on one dramatic moment. Instead, they develop through patterns that repeat over time until exhaustion becomes normal. When you step back and watch these patterns carefully, you start seeing that emotional draining is not simply a feeling or a vague intuition. It is the result of consistent behaviors that slowly redirect your time, attention, and emotional strength away from your own life. One of the most common patterns is the constant crisis cycle. There are individuals whose lives appear to move from one emergency to another with almost no pause between them. Every week brings a new situation that demands immediate attention. A relationship problem appears, followed by a financial crisis, followed by another emotional breakdown that requires urgent support. When you care about someone, your first instinct is to help them through these moments. Compassion tells you that people sometimes experience difficult seasons. But when the crisis never truly ends and the pattern repeats indefinitely, something different is happening. You slowly become their emotional first responder. Whenever their life becomes unstable, they reach for you immediately. Your time becomes the place where they release pressure, but the underlying problems rarely change. Instead, you carry the weight of their emergencies while they remain stuck in the same cycle. Over time, the relationship becomes less about connection and more about emotional rescue. Alongside constant crisis, another pattern often appears that makes the imbalance even clearer. Conversations begin moving in only one direction. You listen, you comfort, and you absorb their emotions, but your own experiences rarely receive the same space. When you attempt to share something from your life, the topic quickly returns to their problems again. Your needs become background noise in a conversation dominated by their struggles. This one-sided dynamic may not appear obvious during the first few interactions. In fact, many compassionate people are naturally willing to listen deeply when someone is hurting. But when the pattern repeats without balance, the emotional load begins shifting entirely onto your shoulders. You carry their frustrations, their fears, and their constant processing, while your own inner world remains largely unseen. The relationship begins functioning like a container, where their emotions are emptied into your space without returning the same care in the other direction.
Another behavior that often appears in draining relationships is the use of guilt as a form of influence. Instead of openly asking for help, certain individuals frame their requests in ways that make refusal feel morally wrong. They remind you that you are the only person they trust, or the only one who truly understands them. They may suggest that if you cared enough, you would give them more time or attention. Statements built on obligation slowly begin shaping the relationship. Instead of choosing to help freely, you begin feeling responsible for maintaining their emotional stability. Compassion becomes tied to duty. The moment you consider stepping back, guilt appears immediately. This form of emotional leverage is powerful because it targets the empathy that already exists within you. Chosen ones often carry strong empathy as part of their nature, and this empathy becomes the very tool that keeps them attached to draining dynamics. When someone learns that your compassion makes you reluctant to say no, they may begin using that compassion as a leash, but the pattern rarely ends there. Another clear signal appears when boundaries are introduced. Healthy people usually adjust their behavior when someone expresses a limit. They may not understand the boundary immediately, but they respect it over time. Energy-draining individuals respond differently. When you shorten a conversation, delay a reply, or explain that you cannot carry certain topics repeatedly, they often push harder instead of adjusting. The request for space becomes another issue to debate. They may call more frequently, message more urgently, or frame your boundary as abandonment. This reaction reveals something important about the dynamic. The relationship was not built on mutual respect for each person's energy. It was built on continuous access to yours. The boundary interrupts that access, and the reaction reveals how dependent the pattern has become. Over time, these behaviors can also begin interfering with your growth in subtle ways. Individuals who rely heavily on your emotional attention may unconsciously resist the changes that strengthen your independence. When you focus on discipline, peace, or personal development, they may redirect conversations toward drama, negativity, or gossip. They may question the habits that bring stability to your life, or subtly discourage the boundaries that protect your time. The reason is not always intentional sabotage. Sometimes it simply reflects their discomfort with the idea that your attention may no longer revolve around their needs. But the effect remains the same. Instead of supporting the direction God is leading you toward, the relationship begins pulling you back into emotional chaos that interrupts your progress. When these patterns appear consistently, the situation becomes clearer. The exhaustion you feel is not random. It is the result of behaviors that steadily redirect your emotional resources away from your purpose. Recognizing these patterns is not an act of judgment, it is an act of awareness. And awareness becomes the first step toward protecting the peace and clarity God intends for your life. Chosen one. Once you recognize the patterns of emotional draining in certain relationships, the next step is learning how to respond without losing the compassion that God placed inside your heart. Many people fear that setting boundaries will make them appear cold or selfish. Because empathy is such a strong part of their nature, they worry that protecting their energy might mean abandoning people who are struggling. But the wisdom God teaches is not about choosing between compassion and protection. It is about learning how to practice compassion without allowing your spirit to be depleted. Love does not require unlimited access. Caring about someone does not mean becoming the constant container for their emotional storms. When you study the life of Jesus, you see a powerful example of this balance. He served people, healed the hurting, and offered guidance to crowds who came searching for hope. Yet, even while surrounded by need, he regularly withdrew to quiet places to pray and restore his spirit. Those moments of withdrawal were not selfish, they were necessary. They protected the clarity and strength required for his purpose. This pattern reveals an important truth for chosen ones today. Withdrawal is not rejection. It is wisdom. You cannot pour strength into the world if your own spirit has no place to recover.
One of the most effective ways to begin protecting your energy is by reducing access without changing your character. Many people assume that boundaries must be dramatic confrontations, but in reality, they often look much quieter.
Instead of answering every call immediately, you allow more time before responding. Instead of long conversations that stretch late into the evening, you keep interactions shorter and more focused. Instead of becoming the 24-hour counselor for someone who refuses to seek deeper help, you gently redirect them toward other forms of support. These changes may appear small, but they shift the rhythm of the relationship in powerful ways. The dynamic that once allowed unlimited emotional access begins to slow down. Your time becomes structured rather than constantly available. And the space created by that structure allows your energy to return to the areas of life God is asking you to focus on. When communication becomes necessary, clear and simple responses protect your peace more effectively than long explanations. Many chosen ones feel pressured to justify every boundary they set, believing they must convince others that their decision is reasonable. But explanations often create debates instead of understanding. The more you explain, the more opportunities someone has to challenge your reasoning or appeal to your empathy again. Clean boundaries work best when they are calm and direct. Stating that you cannot carry a conversation at that moment communicates honesty without hostility. Explaining that you are focusing on your health, your peace, or your responsibilities clarifies your priorities without attacking the other person. Encouraging someone to seek professional help or a broader support system gently reminds them that you are not meant to be their only source of emotional stability. These statements are not acts of rejection. They are acts of balance. They acknowledge the other person's struggle while protecting the health of your own spirit. One of the most revealing moments arrives after you begin setting these limits. The reaction you receive often tells you more about the relationship than any previous conversation. People who respect your well-being usually adapt to the boundary over time. They may feel disappointed at first, but they understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect for each person's capacity. Energy-draining individuals respond very differently. When access becomes limited, they often react with frustration, guilt, or pressure designed to restore the previous dynamic. They may question your loyalty, accuse you of changing, or intensify the emotional urgency of their situations. This response does not mean your boundary was wrong. In many cases, it confirms that the boundary interrupted a pattern that benefited them more than it benefited you. Your boundary reveals their intention. It exposes whether the relationship was built on mutual care or on consistent access to your emotional resources. Alongside these external boundaries, protecting your spirit also requires daily practices that restore your inner balance. Prayer creates a space where your thoughts can settle and reconnect with God's guidance. Journaling allows you to release emotional weight instead of carrying it silently. Silence and rest give your nervous system the chance to recover from the tension created by draining interactions. These practices may appear simple, but they act as spiritual maintenance for your inner life. Just as the body requires rest to regain strength, your spirit requires quiet time to reconnect with the peace God provides. Another important step in this protection is learning where to place your vulnerability. Not every person deserves full access to your deepest struggles or private thoughts. When someone consistently drains your energy, sharing your vulnerabilities with them can create additional opportunities for manipulation or misunderstanding. Discernment means recognizing that some relationships are safe places for openness, while others require distance in order to remain healthy. God does not ask you to stop loving people. He asks you to love with wisdom. And wisdom understands that protecting your spirit is not a betrayal of compassion. It is part of the stewardship required to fulfill the purpose placed on your life. When your energy is aligned with peace instead of constant emotional rescue, you become stronger, clearer, and more capable of serving in the ways God truly intended. Chosen one, by the time you begin recognizing the patterns of emotional draining,
and learning how to protect your energy, a deeper truth starts becoming clear. The exhaustion you once carried was never simply about being busy or overwhelmed by life. It was often the result of giving more of yourself than God ever asked you to give. Many compassionate people grow up believing that love means always being available, always listening, always sacrificing their own peace so that others feel supported. But over time, that belief quietly turns into a burden. When your energy is constantly poured into situations that never change, your own life begins to feel smaller. The focus God placed on your purpose becomes harder to maintain because so much of your emotional strength is spent stabilizing other people's chaos. This is why learning to recognize consistent draining is not an act of selfishness. It is a sign of alignment. When someone repeatedly leaves you depleted, confused, or emotionally heavy, the pattern itself becomes information. It tells you that the relationship may not be functioning in the healthy balance God intends for your life. God's favor on your life was never meant to turn you into a source that others can draw from endlessly without responsibility. The blessings, clarity, and emotional strength He places within you are meant to support your calling. They are meant to fuel the work you are called to do, the growth you are meant to pursue, and the peace you are meant to carry. If that energy is constantly drained by patterns that never respect your boundaries, the purpose attached to your life becomes harder to fulfill. Stewardship of your energy is part of spiritual maturity. Just as a farmer protects the soil that produces a harvest, you must protect the inner resources that allow your life to remain stable and purposeful. Sometimes this protection simply means adjusting the distance within certain relationships. But there are also moments when a deeper decision becomes necessary. When patterns continue repeating after clear boundaries have been established, the message becomes difficult to ignore. If someone consistently ignores your limits, refuses to respect your time, or reacts with guilt and pressure every time you protect your peace, the relationship may be standing outside the alignment God wants for you. Respect is not something that appears only when things are convenient. It shows itself through behavior, especially when boundaries are introduced. When respect never appears, the emotional cost of maintaining the connection becomes heavier than the benefit it brings to your life. In those moments, stepping away may be the healthiest choice you can make. Leaving a draining pattern does not mean you stopped caring about the person. It simply means you recognized that love does not require sacrificing your own stability. Sometimes, the most honest form of compassion is allowing someone to seek the help they truly need, rather than continuing a cycle where you carry responsibilities that were never yours. God never blesses someone so they can be slowly worn down by endless emotional demands. His intention is for you to walk with strength, clarity, and peace as you move through the life He designed for you. When you begin protecting that peace, something remarkable often happens. The constant heaviness that once surrounded certain relationships begins to lift. Your mind becomes clearer because fewer emotional storms are competing for your attention. Your energy returns to the work and growth that matter most. The quiet space created by healthy boundaries allows you to reconnect with the direction God has been guiding you toward all along. And in that space, you remember something important. You are not responsible for fixing every situation or carrying every struggle that appears around you. Your role is to love people with wisdom while remaining faithful to the calling placed on your own life. That balance creates freedom. It allows you to offer kindness without losing yourself in the process. If you recognize these patterns in your own life, let this moment become a reminder that you are allowed to protect the peace God is building inside you. Release the false responsibility that tells you every emotional burden belongs on your shoulders. Choose peace with the approval of God, rather than the pressure of constant availability. And remember that loving people and protecting yourself are not opposites. They are part of the same wisdom that keeps your spirit strong enough to walk the path God has prepared for you.
If this message resonates with you, comment "protected" as a declaration that you are choosing boundaries, clarity, and peace as you continue growing in discernment, healing, and the life God is calling you to live.